So, you talked about loving the family. You mentioned a little bit about following the rules of things. And I think that they might combine into my next question, which is, how have you as a mother, as a Black woman, as somebody who's in higher education as well as community work, raising and teaching kids in 2020? And when I say kids, I don't necessarily mean your children. I mean that even the adults who may pretend that sometimes we're just kids, because we're all learning, right? So what does
Right.
teaching and raising folks look like in 2020?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult time here now, because I will say that, so my mother is white and my father is Black. And so they got married in 1974,
Mm.
and they couldn't even get married in the church because no church would marry them. So my mother's the Catholic one, my father's the Baptist one, right? So they had to go down to Ohio. We're from Flint, Michigan. They were in Flint. Went down to Ohio to go get married in a courthouse because they couldn't find anyone to marry them. So this is in my lifetime. These are my parents. So it's not that far removed. But I do believe that I personally had thought that we were better than I have been disappointed to see we are.
Mm.
So that has been painful on some levels. And I'm a person who studies race inside of education, right? So I study this history of education and this history of race and how those things connect in policy. And with all the knowledge I have, I still am like, feel like I'm forever disappointed, right? And so with my own kids, and even with the people I work with, if you come to a presentation or anything of mine, I'm going to bring out the history.
Mm.
And I'm all about telling the truth, but not trying to tell people how to think. Because to me, I feel like if you lay out the history and you lay out the evidence, I don't need to tell you what to think. You have eyes to see, you have ears to hear. I do the same thing with my kids. I'm very upfront. Like, we don't hide race conversations in my house. We never have. We never have. And we're not ashamed to say Black people or white people. I'm like, that's not a cuss word. Those are not cuss words. It's okay to say that. But for me as a mother, the mother part of me wants them to understand that as much evil that we're seeing in the world and ugly that we're seeing in the world, that there are more people that want good and that are beautiful, right?
Mm.
And just always like trying to keep that at the forefront. So I say fighting for the world as we wish it to be, while being equipped to deal with it as it is. So having to balance those things with your own personal children, I think, is important. And with people who you work with. I've been hearing a lot of conversations about hope. People talk about hope a lot, and feeling so pessimistic and losing hope and not being optimistic enough. And I did a talk the other day, and I said, to me, the hope is in what we're seeing. To me, the hope is in the protest. To me, the hope is in the riot. Because I know that talking back, right, and these actions that we're seeing have another side. And it's going to be up to us what that other side is going to look like. But to me, it's like we're alive, and we know that so much has been wrong for so long, and we're not just dead to it. We're not numb to it. If we weren't protesting, that's when I would be worried. If we didn't see what we see, because that means we have become so apathetic that we're not even trying. And to me, that's the scariest thing. So to me, you get up and you fight every day, and that's what it is. However you fight, right now I'm an academic, so I'm not in the street as much as I used to be 3 years ago, because I'm in classrooms or at home writing or whatever. But I write with my research. I write what I write, and there are people who try to police that and say, no, you can't say that. Why? So imagine if they're trying to police what I type on paper. Imagine what they're doing to people that are in legislatures, that are marching in the streets, right? That are standing up for their kids. These mothers that I've been following for the last almost 3 years, the pushback they get with their actions, just being at meetings is intimidating. And people are calling police officers and telling them to get them out the school, right? So the fact that we're still pushing back, to me, is hopeful. And I want my kids to see that. And I hope that people see that, because we have to know that there's a better way and there's another way. You don't get to that way without struggle, right? Frederick Douglass said, no progress with no struggle. It's not going to be easy. We can't think it's going to be easy.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And it's this interesting dichotomy with young folks now, that so many of them are picking up. We're of similar age. We both are teachers, and I have in the past apologized to my classes within like the first week of school, and by saying, I'm sorry that my generation hasn't done right by you, but no, we're still here.
Right.
We're still learning, and what gifts may not be evident in the struggle that you have now, they are there. And so let's find a way to bring them together. But always an apology of like, I'm sorry, my generation, who knew that the generation of, skateboarding, ska, hip hop, all of that stuff, that we would be blamed for this generation having to suffer. Like we were all about the protest through the arts, right? And through, we may not have taken to the street, but we used narrative, we used music, we used fashion, we used all of these things in which to create an entire culture that sadly is being erased through TikTok, some of those other things now. So I say all of that to say, how do you encourage, or how do you, in the circles where you find that the narrative is trying to be controlled by institutions and by systems, how do you yourself find hope, and how can you take it a little bit further by saying, yeah, if there's no struggle, then there's no change. But how do you prepare people for that change that's going to happen? Because it's coming, right? The change is coming. But what is the plan for when the change comes, I guess, is more or less.
Right. So to me, that's the question, right? So I think that we hope the change will be for the better, but we're not there yet. Because I think that there's a history of backlash, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially of white backlash. I can't think of the scholar right now who wrote the book. I'm going to remember her name and send it to you, because I don't like quoting scholars without giving them credit. But there's this long history of white backlash, right? What we're seeing now is because of Barack Obama. Let's be very clear, right? It's not because of economics and all this other stuff that people are trying to throw, in my opinion. So I think that, first of all, we cannot assume that whatever change is coming will automatically be on the side of good. Like we all hope it will be, or the people I deal with hope that it will be, that we'll have a more just society, and we'll have pay equity, and we'll have housing for people, and in a country that can, feed people 3 times over, everyone will have a meal, right? We can't assume that, because, for example, we have an election coming up, right? And there's consequences to the election, and I can't guarantee what's going to happen. We didn't think it was going to happen 4 years ago. It's going to happen. So we can't assume such things. So I would say that that's the first thing. But the second thing is, regardless of that, I wish I saw more conversation. I wish we were having more conversations about a plan or a strategy, because I think that it's hard for people to imagine what a tomorrow without oppression looks like. I think we are incapable. I think we are seriously incapable of even imagining it, to the point that, going back to our generation, I think, you know, we could say the generation before didn't go far enough. The generation before didn't go far enough. You know, we passed Brown v. Board, and people were just happy that their kids go to whatever school, but we didn't push for resources, equity in that. We didn't push for equity in the teachers who were in front of the classroom. Why does it have to be that I gotta go to the other side of town with my kid, or vice versa, right? We didn't push far enough either. Our parents didn't, we didn't, right? We come up against this system that we have such faith in. Even though we mess with it, we mess with the edges, but we're not gonna mess with the spine. We're not gonna mess with the heart. We scared of that. We scared of that part. I honestly think that. And so what is it gonna look like? I can't say, because I fear, honestly, one of my fears is that we would have some sort of a turnover in power, and that the power would only mimic the power that we just replaced. And that's not getting us any further either. Again, because we cannot imagine a world without oppression. You know, I'm reading Octavia Butler right now.
Parable of the Sower, girl.
Reading Parable of the Sower right now.
Yes.
Yes. I have not read a fictional book for probably a decade, easily. Not because I don't like fiction. I love to read, but it's just because I'm always reading school books. So I was like, I'm joining this book club. I'm going to read these books. And that book is so dark so far. I'm not at the end of the book yet. It's so dark. It is so mirroring what we are going through right now, which is what is so scary about the book. She wrote this book in 1984, I believe, or something?
Yep, 83, 84.
Yeah.
Yep.
And her future was 2024.
Yep.
Right? This book takes place in 2024, and we're 4 years away from that. But what we see in the book is we see the continuous mimicking of the oppressive structures that have always been in place, because we cannot imagine something else. Lauren in the book is trying to imagine a different form of God, have you, right, in this new religion. And she is like, people don't even want to hear it because they can't even imagine something else. And I hope that we get past that. I think we have to put that in our children, to imagine that it's a possibility, because the elders, including our generation, will tell you that it's impossible. That you always have to have somebody oppressing somebody else. You always got to have somebody on top, right? You always got to have somebody siphoning resources from somewhere. Even if you look at the capitalist system, the way it's set up, I mean, by nature, somebody's winning and somebody's losing. That's it. And that's how we're brought up to think. And I think we have to think differently. We have to challenge ourselves, and hopefully bringing up other kids. We live in this time of technology that's beautiful. It really can be beautiful, but can be ugly at the same time, because we're using it with the same philosophy, and we're using it to extract resources, whether it's your mind or your time, or whatever it is, you know, and we just have to go about things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, what's great is for the people on the other end of the camera. When you talk, I focus in on you. So that way, if I need to run and go get a book like I just did, they don't even know, except perhaps by your reaction of like, where'd she go?
I was like, are you going to edit this?
Possibly.
Oh.
You know, you talk about technology being a beautiful thing and a complicated thing. I'm not sure if you've read Ruha Benjamin's Race After Technology book. Mm-hmm. It's an incredibly beautiful book. She's a graduate from San Diego State University, and I think she teaches at Princeton now. But it really does, you know, we think of technology as being neutral. Robots and computers and all of this stuff is neutral, but yet somebody still has to program that, right? And so I teach business English at Gateway Community College, and the students have to read this book.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, and I'll send you some videos post this, so because she's done a lot this summer. That's the great part about technology, is we've been able to see her speak. Right. And be hosted by different universities that we would have never gone to because we weren't in that circle, right?
Right.
And
exactly.
Yeah, people getting to see you talk in all of the different realms that you've been there. I think I'll ask you 2 more questions, if I may. What do you hope for?
I hope for a world where my son can take a walk in the morning around our neighborhood and I don't have to follow him around in my car because I'm scared he ain't gonna make it back home. That's what I hope for. I feel like once we have that reality, I feel like we're definitely ready for other things, because that's literally what, I do. Where I know parents and myself that don't feel like they have to pull their kids out of school because schools have become the epitome space of Black suffering and not enlightenment and knowledge, which is what they're supposed to be, right? Where my daughter, my 8-year-old, doesn't have to question me, Mommy, why is that man on the street asking for food? And I don't have to explain that to her, right? That's, and going back to kind of like that veil of ignorance that we have to train ourselves to be like that. And we all have that bias and everything. And I've been doing this work for 25 years. And I have to check myself. And what I was telling you earlier, I get up every day and I say, there are more good people than bad people. There are more good people than bad people. I have to hype myself up, because you can fall into this, right? You can get dark and get angry. And that space is where anger and hate lives, right? And once we're there, Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in his final book, Where Do We Go From Here, Community or Chaos? And it's not a direct quote, but he pretty much was like, are we going to, moving forward? In the book, the reason I love that book, that's like my favorite book of his, is you see him even questioning himself. Like, you see that he had doubts about some things. He wrote the book, like, I think on an island in Cuba, I believe, obviously the last book he wrote before he was assassinated. And he talked about how we have to make sure we are wholly committed, right, to loving one another. And I know for a lot of people, especially right now, that's controversial. That's controversial. And he says in the book that pretty much we're either going to destroy ourselves with hate, right, or we're going to build something better. Those are the 2 options. There are no other options. We're going to be, I think he was like co-collaborators for annihilation. We're going to annihilate each other. That's just what it is. So what are we going to do? And that's something I think about a lot. I don't know all the answers at all. I don't. I change my mind probably every other week. So some weeks are good weeks, and I'm hopeful, more hopeful than others. Sometimes you can get dark. I think a lot of what we see on TV and everything right now, it's a lot, but it's nothing new. And so I'm speaking from the race position. In the Black community, none of this is anything new. My father never went back down south. I never went down south to see my family, because my father made it very clear he was never going back down there with his wife and his kids, because he knew what could happen to him. So I came up with that understanding. This was nothing new, and I was in the North, right? When people would say certain things to us, my daddy would tell me, well, Dawn, the reason they said you were so impressive is because you're Black and they don't expect it. I'm no more impressive than any of the other kids in my class. So why are they making such a big deal? When you're 8, 9, you don't understand that. And, we have to refresh ourselves. And I think that having conversations with people like you, one of the great things about technology is we do get to create community, and it's limitless, right? I get to meet with mothers all over the country, and I'm not bound by geography. you know what I'm saying? Which kind of leads into the new, rights. is digital and technology, right? So who are those people that we're not affording that quote unquote luxury that's every day becoming less and less of a luxury? It's less and less of a luxury. Have access to computers, have access to internet and everything. You can't even barely apply for a job without it, you know? So yeah, I know I went off, but
I don't mind. That's exactly what this is about, right? Because you know, in the time of struggle and where we're on, who's see, and I'm gonna somebody was talking about in a podcast with Parker Palmer called On the Growing Edge, and it was like 2 or 3 months ago. There was a woman who was a doula, a midwife, and some other things, but she really talked about, you know, we talk about the birth of a nation and not that horrible film, but we talk about our labor pains. So I think we're in labor pains right now, right? So talking about these things are really important because there's so many things to care about. And you touched on, you know, the survival of our children, of our Black, Brown, and Indigenous children, the survival of our Black, Brown, and Indigenous daughters, folks living on the streets without homes, people corralled into prisons, forgotten about, the votes being taken away from people who fought so hard for the vote to be taken away. And we forget that there's those next steps, right? I think Ta-Nehisi Coates said in the Vanity Fair article last week about, yeah, voting is important, but the vote has never been available to everybody. It will continue to not be available to everybody. So what are you doing beyond the vote, right? And that is most definitely an ineloquent paraphrase of what he said. And that is my interpretation of what he shared in that article. But when there's so many things to care about, I think we often forget that in reality, they're all connected.
Yes.
They're all connected. And doing work with women who are incarcerated in a state prison is really the first time that I understood that it was all connected. And so with that, I wonder, how do you love in the time of struggle? And that means for you, like, how do you love yourself? How do you love your children? How do you love the world? How do you love the stuff we see on social media that is stuff?
So I'll start with the self. And so there are various parts to Dawn, right? I'm a woman, right? I'm a mother. I am Black. I, you know, according to, you know, how we identify socioeconomic status, I'm poor. Okay, let's be clear. I'm a PhD student. You know, you can't live off $24,000 a year with 3 kids. It's just not a thing. So I have all of these things, all of these identities about myself that I have to embrace and love first, I think, before I can go outside of myself. And we hear that a lot, like, you gotta love yourself, can't nobody love you, you can't expect nobody to love you if you don't love yourself. And so I don't want to take it to that extent, because I think sometimes people say that as a cop-out for treating people like shiznit. I'm not saying that. I've raised my children to believe that you love people because they are human and they deserve respect and love, period, right? But you do have to do the internal work, because I think that what you will find is that people are not genuine about their love for others if they can't be genuine about their love for themselves. So my area of study is around Black people. I love Black people. And to me, that is not antithetical to loving all people. To me, I can't love all people if I don't love my people. So starting kind of on that micro level, I love women, right? And it's painful for me to see women who don't love women. It has nothing to do with sexuality, or if it is sexuality, whatever. But sometimes we throw darts at each other for the love of someone else outside of us, for the love of a man or attention of a man or whatever. So then how much do you really love you if you're doing that to another woman, right? So we have to start there. In terms of like this global sense of love, like I said, I kind of mentioned it earlier, like this agape love, but I also think that there are things that we have to let go of. I think in the United States of America, we have been raised to, believe kind of like this Protestant tradition of hard work wins the race type of stuff. And you look out for number one and you take care of number one. And if everybody else, sucks, well, that's their own fault. And I think, again, that's antithetical to love. I think that's antithetical to love. And to fight against that in this country, raising children in this country that is so corporate, that is so selfish, that is so individualistic, that is so economic, and that becomes the answer to everything. People think that, well, if you have more money, that will be the answer to everything. Jay-Z is a billionaire, and he ain't did nothing for nobody that I know now. I'm not saying he hasn't. I believe the brother has. But I'm saying that that's not the answer. And even Jay-Z with his money recognizes that that's not wholly the answer, because when it comes to certain things, he's pushing against those systems. He's going to have to push against those systems, and we have to be willing to change those systems. If not for myself individually, I could say, oh, I'm doing well. I live on a college campus. I don't have to worry about this pandemic. Me and my kids are fine. I don't do what I do just for me, because if you're doing what you do just for you, you do not have love, and you definitely don't have global love. Like, we have to shift off of that. It's just about me and my family, or just me, right? Into how are we all connected, and how can we all make the world better? Which means we have to let go of a lot of this Americanism, for lack of a better way to put it. People are uncomfortable with that. I get it, but it's no good. And, when we look at indigenous traditions, no matter what they are, they have a strong sense of group identity, and they have a strong sense of group care. And when they come here, they're expected to drop that, right, and let go of that. And I'm always intrigued by that, because I say it don't work for white people. What makes us think it's gonna work for us? We have probably more senior citizens in elder care homes than any country. Let's understand this. We take our elders when we don't want to deal with them, and we put them somewhere else that they don't know. Let's think about that. That has not been culturally how indigenous people do things. That's not how we do things. But people make money off of that. People make money off of making you believe that every single person needs their own individual house with 5 and 6 bedrooms, right? Capitalism wins. People don't win. And we have to go deeper into that. I think that racism and capitalism are tied together. They're connected. Sexism is tied together. You always need somebody to stay home and take care of the house, or somebody else is out making the money, and we determine that that's going to be the woman. Still to this day. And we punish women by not paying them as much as we pay white men, right? Because you're not supposed to be here anyway. Like, really, that's what's behind that, right? It's thinking they're not even supposed to be there in the first place. So, like, at the end of the day, it's a mind shift that I don't think people have put in the work to do, the hard work to do, the psychological, the heart work. Dr. Bernice King earlier, I heard her talking about heart work and hard work, right? Both things have to happen. Both things have to happen.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I will give you the option if you would like to end the interview now. I know I have 2 more. I know you just keep talking. I'm like, I only have 1 more question, but I actually have 2 more. Now I have 5 more. And this could be a conversation that we have beyond this. But, I'm going to be preaching on the difference between feminist theology and womanist theology, and the context of Black Lives Matter. And I didn't know myself until very recently the difference between feminism and womanism. And so we could talk about that if you would like, or that could be another time. And then I think the other thing that I wanted to just touch base on is an identity question that perhaps you and I will have private one-on-one, and then we can have you back to have this conversation. But it's just all of the number of identities that you are, right? Because we're not just one thing. And as hard as it is to believe, we're not just one identity. Right, in all of those. And I think that understanding that is a better way to work hard to love yourself and all of that stuff. So I encourage you and I to meet again and talk about those things beyond this. And as much as you like Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents will blow your mind. That's her second follow-up book.
Okay. Yes, I already have in my head that I'm going to get it. And now I'm like, okay, so I got to read all her books now.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I do a lot or I look at Afro-pessimism, right? And so somebody like Octavia Butler goes more into like the Afrofuturism sort of thing, but there's ways that they converge, and people think they're total opposites, but they're really not, the philosophies. So it's just really interesting. It's just so interesting to read this book. I haven't read a fictional book for so long, and so it's like I'm so like in this book, and I'm like, wow, I'm gonna finish this in a couple days.
Yeah, academia steals your creativity for a bit, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just now getting back into it. Really quick, can you give us, on this end, who may not know the difference between Afrofuturism and Afro-pessimism, can you give us a quick...
Okay. I don't know if there is a quick way. So I will say in the quickest. So I look at Afro-pessimism, and I'm a novice, so I'm still learning and reading the folks like Sadia Hartman, you know, and other folks like that. So Afro-pessimism is really this philosophy around the idea that Blackness has always been seen as antithetical to what is civil and considered good. And so as Black people, we've always been treated in that vein. So you can't have whiteness residing in harmony with Blackness, because to them they can never mesh, because just by definition Blackness is uncivil. There's so many more things to it. It goes into the performance or the necessity of seeing pain, of seeing Black pain to such a grotesque extent before white empathy can be even touched, right? So right now what we're seeing, like all this stuff that we're seeing on TV, and I've been reading a few articles where people are like, oh, white people seem to be coming around and getting it. And I'm like, how many of us had to die for that to happen, right? And so Sadia Hartman talks about that in her book, when she talks about, you know, at the beginning of her book, she talks about Frederick Douglass in his autobiography, talks about when his aunt was beat by her master and how he described that scene. And she goes into saying that the reason he was so descriptive was to grab the reader, who we're assuming is white, right? Who's reading the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, right, in the 1800s, is white folks. And so to be able to get their sympathy, you have to lay out everything. You have to bear everything to them, right? Your blood, your bones, literally, before they have an inch of sympathy. So Afro-pessimism goes like really deep into that, being a people without a true home, right? I saw a meme the other day that said African Americans are African without memory and African without memory and American without rights, or something like that, you know. So that's Afro-pessimism. Afrofuturism is more of this ability to imagine what tomorrow could be. Not only if it could be different though. Afrofuturism is not always like this optimistic future. As you read in Octavia Butler's book, it definitely has an Afro-pessimistic tone to it because the future's not great. But where we talk about Afrofuturism is at least Black folks are there, because in science fiction, very often Black folks ain't even there. So did they even imagine us being there at all? And so Afrofuturism pushes up against that. So maybe in the future we're still having the same fight, but we're still there. You know, at least we're still there.
Yes.
You know, we haven't disappeared. So yeah, that's super short.
Well, that is
learning.
yeah, well, right. And right, that's the key, right? We're all still learning in the process of it. And so I really want to take this opportunity to thank you, Dawn Demps, PhD candidate with the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University, and a mother and a community organizer and a fellow with the American Association of University of Women and a fellow with the ASU Dissertation Completion Fellow. I just really want to thank you so much for just being the stars in the sky, really,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
thank you so much.
thank you.